Hello, welcome back. I've been thinking about something and meaning to do this video on it, and the topic is asking the right question. I thought about this while I was doing my video about pseudoscience and culture wars, where I talked about the Dreyfus affair, and I remembered another sort of internet culture war from a few years ago. It never really became a big thing off the internet, but there was a thing once on the internet. It posed the question whether if you put an aeroplane on a treadmill or a conveyor belt and run the conveyor belt backwards and drive the plane forwards, can the plane take off? Now, I do know the answer to this because I've read about it more than is healthy. Issue comes down to a quite interesting point about exactly how you ask the question. And there is going to be a Letby connection in a minute, so bear with me. I'll come back to why in a second. So there are two versions really of the question. You can look at it from the point of view where you ask the question in the form, can the pilot be prevented from taking off if the pilot wants to make the plane take off? Or you can ask the question in the form, is there a way to run the treadmill and have the pilot and the treadmill operator conspire so as to keep the plane stationary? And then I think some less well-informed people also then ask the question, will the plane take off? To which the answer is obviously no. The answer to the first question, however, is yes, the plane will take off, and no, the treadmill operator acting alone cannot prevent the pilot from taking off if the pilot is attempting to take off. I won't go into the exact details of why here because it's beyond the scope of this, but you can look into that further elsewhere. So can the pilot make the plane take off irrespective of what the treadmill's doing? Yes, he can. Will the plane take off if it remains stationary? No, it won't. But the interesting point here really is people who understood the question as question 1 and people who understood the question as question 2 diverge into different worlds and completely lose touch with each other. So going back to the Letby case, we had this story yesterday about Jayaram writing this email where his first account of it nearer the time was that Lucy had called him in to help with baby K, and this obviously contradicts the evidence he gave later, which said that he found it suspicious that she hadn't asked for any help, and he'd caught her just standing there doing nothing. So what I've seen on Twitter today is some people from the guilty camp answering a different question to the question that matters. The question that matters is the case against Lucy Letby sound? And the answer to that obviously is no, and even less so given what we learned yesterday. But some people in the guilty camp are instead answering a different question, which is there a way she could be guilty? And the answer to that is yes. But it isn't the question that should be asked. So you could always conjure up a scenario where anyone is guilty of anything, provided you keep changing the basis of the case and you always change it in a way that it can't ever be falsified. Essentially, you create an unfalsifiable claim. An unfalsifiable claim is the heart of pseudoscience. Another famous example of that was Carl Sagan's dragon, where he talked about somebody claiming to have an invisible dragon, and he posited that you could initially test this claim by looking for its footprints, but then the person can still claim to have the dragon because the dragon also floats in the air. And then he said, well, you could detect the heat from the dragon, and the person said, well, my dragon doesn't produce any heat, and it also doesn't make any sound, and it also can't be touched. So it's therefore exactly the same in the end as there being no dragon. You could always make up any allegation in a way that can't ever be falsified, and say it's possible that someone's guilty of something, even if all the evidence that you claimed before existed has been discredited. The case against someone has been brought on a certain basis, that there's medical evidence of harm, there's a certain eyewitness observation, weak as it already was, and there's this claim that Lucy was present at every suspicious incident. Every single piece of it has essentially fallen away now. In a way, you can also connect this back to Judge Goss's direction to the jury on what it is they need to be sure of. He instructed them that they didn't need to be sure of the exact mechanism that harm was caused by, they only needed to be sure that it happened somehow. There are difficult overlaps between that idea and this idea, I think. Are you returning a guilty verdict on the basis that you're satisfied the case has been proved, or are you returning it on the basis that there's a way it's possible in theory the crime could have been committed? And I think he was almost creating a dangerous bridge between the two ideas there right from the start. Where that idea is valid is where you have proof that a defendant has committed two harmful acts. Say they were seen punching and kicking the victim, and you don't know whether it was the punch or the kick that caused the death, or both. It would then make sense to have that rule. It makes less sense, and maybe no sense, to have it where the case has been brought on the basis that you know how the harm was done, to then say that it isn't actually necessary to know how the harm was done. Going back to the Jayaram email, it's possible that he didn't write the email. I've seen some people suggest. And again, this is about asking the right question, because you could also ask the question, is this email proof that he's deliberately committed perjury? And if he didn't write the email, it's more likely that, again, he just could have made a mistake rather than deliberately committed perjury. But that also isn't the right question again, because the right question is the case sound? Irrespective of why it's no longer sound, it still isn't. It doesn't have to be proof that Jayaram has deliberately misled the court. It's sufficient to make the case unsound that his evidence was wrong for any reason.
How can you be so obtuse?
And if somebody else emailed because they had a recollection of him calling Lucy in, that still undermines the case, even if he honestly believed that that didn't happen. So if that email wasn't disclosed to the defence, it completely undermines the fairness of the trial. And this is, of course, on top of everything we knew already. So that's kind of my take on the new information, really, and my take on what people have been saying today.
You don't know it's true.
I don't know it's not true. It might be.
Anything might be true.
Exactly. Well done, Bernard.